You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 4th of April 2014. Grandson of Muslim Brotherhood founder, now an advisor to British Government office. The Muslim Brotherhood, why is Cameron taking orders from bloodstained generals and playboy princes? More Birmingham head teachers raise fears of Islamic plot to take over schools. Norway, Breivik to go to court to end solitary confinement. Turkey's latest jihad on Armenian Christians in Syria. Nick Griffin MEP from the belly of the beast. Ebola toll tops 80 in West Africa. Russia raises gas prices for Ukraine by 80%. Thought for the day, who are the parasites? And finally, hot and cold sex. UK news. Grandson of Muslim Brotherhood founder, now an advisor to British Government office. If British Prime Minister David Cameron is serious about investigating the Muslim Brotherhood in his country, he might want to start with one of his own government offices and a certain Baroness Vorsey, who serves as a senior minister there. Tariq Ramadan, the maternal grandson of Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, has not renounced the group. In fact, he proudly displays his ancestry and speaks frequently at Muslim Brotherhood events in the US. As Shubat.com has reported in the past, Ramadan is even connected to the Brotherhood's spiritual leader Yusuf al-Qaradawi. Ramadan was named as the director of the Qatari-based Centre for Islamic Legislation (CILE) in 2012. It was learnt at the time that the CILE rolls up under the Qatar Faculty of Islamic Studies (QFIS), which is very closely linked to Qatari. World at 8. We are truly deluded into thinking these Muslims are on our side. They are not. None of them are ever on the side for a predominantly white Christian England. The Muslim Brotherhood, why is Cameron taking orders from bloodstained generals and playboy princes? Peter Osborne in his Telegraph blog writes, David Cameron has been a competent and in many ways an underestimated Prime Minister, especially when dealing with domestic policy. However, he brought negligible experience of foreign affairs with him into Downing Street. As a result, he has largely been out of his depth and very easily swayed in foreign policy. The latest example of the Prime Minister's naivety concerns his decision to order an investigation into the Muslim Brotherhood and its alleged links to violent extremism in Britain. The timing of Mr Cameron's statement is strange and troubling. His announcement looks very much like a political stunt designed to protect Britain's trading relationship with Saudi Arabia. The announcement comes just 6 weeks after the British defence firm BAE Systems finally agreed to a deal on the price of the 72 Eurofighter Typhoon jets it's selling to the Saudis, with the announcement coming during the Prince of Wales' visit to the kingdom. World at 8. It gets worse, doesn't it? More Birmingham head teachers raise fears of Islamic plot to take over schools. Birmingham school bosses are believed to have been inundated with letters and calls from anxious city head teachers and governors worried that Muslim extremists could be plotting to take over their schools. The City Council is understood to have drafted in extra staff to investigate the allegations of a concerted plot by hardline Islamists called Operation Trojan Horse to infiltrate schools and indoctrinate pupils by using dirty tricks to remove non-Muslim staff. Since the allegations revealed in the Birmingham Mail last month, it has emerged that at least 12 Birmingham schools are under investigation by Ofsted, and the Department for Education and Secretary of State Michael Gove is being kept informed of developments. European news. Norway, Breivik to go to court to end solitary confinement. The anti-Islamic terrorist Anders Behring Breivik is planning to take legal action to end his 33 months in solitary confinement, arguing that it is violating his human rights. Breivik's lawyer Tor Jodet told Aftenposten newspaper that the long period of isolation his client had endured constituted an additional punishment which had not been part of the 21-year sentence he received in 2012. We're looking into it now, and after the summer holiday we will make the decision as to whether we will do it or not, Breivik's lawyer Geir Lipstad told the Local. At some point it will be against human rights, so the prison must have a plan to rehabilitate him, and those plans don't exist today. World at 8, quite right. If Muslim rapists and murderers can have their human rights considered in prison, why not the other end of the scale? One for all, I say. Turkey's latest jihad on Armenian Christians in Syria. Far from being repentant for the 1915 Armenian genocide, in which 1.5 million were slaughtered by the Ottoman Turks, Turkey, under the leadership of Prime Minister Erdogan, is again targeting Armenians and causing their deaths and dislocation today. In the early hours of March 21st, Al-Qaeda-linked Islamic jihadists crossed into Syrian territory from the Turkish border and launched a jihad on the Christian Armenian town of Kasab. Among other things, snipers targeted the civilian population and launched mortar attacks on the town and the surrounding villages. Reportedly 80 people were killed. The jihadis later made a video touring the devastated town. No translation is needed, as the main phrase shouted throughout is Islam's triumphant war cry, Allahu Akbar, according to Senator John McCain's translation, thank God. Eyewitnesses say the jihadis crossed the Turkish border into Syria, openly passing through Turkish military barracks. According to Turkish media reports, the attackers carried their injured back to Turkey for treatment in the town of Yelagaji. About 2,000 Armenians were evacuated to safer areas in neighbouring Basit and Latakia. Several of these families are currently living inside the churches of these towns. 10 to 15 families, with members too elderly to flee, remained in Kasab, their fate currently unknown. World at 8. Actually, Allahu Akbar means God is great, not thank God. Belly of the Beast. I now hand you over to Nick Griffin MEP.
For more than a year now, the main parliamentary building in Brussels, where we actually do the voting, has been closed because the roof has been collapsing. It's all really rather symbolic and quite amusing, especially they initially told us it would take a few weeks to fix, then it was months, and in the end it took a long time indeed. But the collapsing roof is finally fixed, unlike the Euro project itself, which of course continues to crumble. The latest twist is that there's now a real serious and growing problem with deflation, falling prices, which is actually almost as bad an economic catastrophe as inflation, and they're beginning to get worried about this. There's the core problem of deflation is that it automatically means that whatever debts are there become worth even more and harder to pay off. So a good, unhealthy dose of deflation will and is going to lead to a massive increase in the real debt burden of Spain, Greece, Italy, Portugal, Ireland, and pretty much everybody actually. And we've got the European Central Bank not even fiddling, while Rome, and indeed the whole of southern Europe, burns. It is likely to get very messy indeed. Not next week, not next month, but sooner or later the whole lot will go up in flames and come crashing down, almost like the roof did. But coming back to this week, the votes were mainly budgetary sign-offs. So we're supposedly voting there to approve the very limited oversight of the spending of millions and millions and millions and millions of euros. So naturally enough, I was there voting over and over again, against signing this off, against signing that off. Except where there were, in some of the reports, actually welcome criticisms of the Commission and the European Parliament and so on. And of course, for those, I was voting yes. All, frankly, rather tedious. There were two bits of excitement, though, this week. First of all, there was a debate on common EU foreign and security policy, which noticeably was the very last thing that the truly horrid Baroness Ashton, the Labour Party toady who is basically in charge of the European Union's foreign policy operation, or has been for the last couple of years. It's the last one she's going to be at because she's moving on. So I took the opportunity to make sure that her hopefully lasting and abiding memory of being in the European Parliament is having me put the boot in to her and the rest of their warmongering and meddling in the Ukraine. As usual, there weren't many people there to hear me use my 60-second ration of democracy, but out of those who were there, I'm pleased to say that I drew howls of rage with what I had to say. The good Baroness, as usual, sat looking as though she was chewing a particularly stubborn and determined wasp. You can see it all on our main website. Hope you enjoy it. The other bit of something less than tedium came during votes on the Ivan report. Paragraph 47 of this had been removed, so we weren't able to vote to approve it or not. And it turns out that paragraph 47 was critical of Herr President Schulz and how he uses his staff. Presumably this is Of course, we can't see it, so we don't know. This sounds like criticism of Schulz for using his parliamentary staff for German socialist political purposes. I wouldn't be at all surprised. Anyway, the lady chairman of the meeting explains that this had been taken out because under presidential prerogative, it's still to be decided whether or not the criticism is justified. There were protests, in fact quite loud and angry protests, over the fact that the decision as to whether the president acted rightly or wrongly will be made by, you guessed it, the president. And so we were told we can't vote on this because the president's quite entitled to cut it out and decide what's going to be done later. So one bright MEP, I don't know who it was, rose to ask for a vote, in fact to demand a vote, on postponing the final adoption of the report in order to give the president a chance to reflect on what he should or shouldn't do. This was vigorously resisted there by the lady chairman, but for a while, because of a rising chorus of anger and various of us banging on our benches and generally making nuisances of ourselves, but for once from really all across the chamber, except for the socialist bloc on the centre left, there was so much noise that in the end she accepted that a vote was needed. So, by show of hands, there was clearly a very big majority in favour of postponing the report, in other words, being very, very critical of Herr President Schulz. Some wags shouted check. Check is what's done normally when the show of hands is very close and someone feels that the votes may in fact have gone the other way to that which the chairman of the day has declared. So there's an electronic check, which is absolutely accurate. Check, check, check. More and more people, including, of course, myself, called out. And in the end, the lady chairman had to give way. OK, she said very grudgingly, you can have your check. With the result that when the votes showed up on the electronic screens, there was 431 of us in favour of, frankly, humiliating Herr President Schulz, and only 154, basically the socialist bloc, there saying that he should be allowed to do away with anything like parliamentary oversight in the question of something criticising him. Absolute humiliation for Schulz, who, as I think I've said before, looks like Lenin and sounds like Hitler. It was tremendous to see. It would have been even more fun had he been there, but unfortunately he'd found some pressing reason to stay away from the whole voting session. Nevertheless, for a few moments, it did seem just like a real parliament. But of course, it's not. After something of a media drought in recent months, not recent years, I had a busy and productive couple of days in terms of interviews with the media this week. I did one with Grenada over the forthcoming elections. I did one for Swedish TV on the immigration debate, or the lack of it in most circles, and had the opportunity to really lay into them for their innate racism in denying that there was any such thing as indigenous Swedes, or for that matter, indigenous English people, indigenous Europeans in any nation in Europe. As I said to them, you wouldn't dare go to New Zealand and say to a Maori, well, you're not indigenous, you've only been here 1,000 years, so everyone can come to New Zealand and take your country off you. They wouldn't do it to them. Why on earth should they do it to us? I'm sure you, as well as me, know the reason, but and I didn't have time to develop that with Swedish TV, but it's always good to get the point across. Then, following my comments in the Parliament about the folly of the European Union's constant meddling in Ukraine and warmongering against Russia, I was interviewed by Polish television. Quite useful, that one, because it will be seen quite a lot in Russia as well. So I was pleased with that one. The thing with these foreign stations is that a few years ago, something he'd said on one of those TV stations would have been lost as far as a British audience is concerned. But in the ever-linked world of the internet, what's said even on foreign stations tends to filter back home. The particularly important one I think I did this week was quite a long interview on the Voice of Russia radio on the question of our British National Party food banks. And although the reporter interviewing me asked plenty of awkward questions, he gave me the chance to answer them. Frankly, it was a gift. So it was a very good bit of radio, I think. I gather it's on our website, so you can listen to that too, to hear what I've been up to this week. Wherever these things are said, in the end, as I say, it all tends to filter back home and into the consciousness of at least parts of our electorate. So it's all grist to the mill. So all in all, it was a good week showing people that not only are we still here, but we're biting back.
Thank you very much, Nick, for your input today. World News. Ebola toll tops 80 in West Africa. CNN. The death toll from an Ebola outbreak in coastal West Africa has risen to 84, with dozens more ill, aid workers reported Thursday. The deaths are among the 131 cases reported by the World Health Organization, which said the outbreak has rapidly evolved since originating in the forests of southeastern Guinea. The city of Gekadu, near the borders with Sierra Leone and Liberia, has seen 79 cases, 57 of them are fatal. Another 4 deaths were in the capital, Conakry. It's the first emergence of Ebola in Western Africa, and WHO spokesman Tarek Jassavarich said the UN agency is trying to track people who had encountered the victims and make sure that all those who have been in contact with infected people are being checked upon. What is really important is to inform the population of Guinea and Conakry about this disease, as this is the first time they are facing Ebola. They need to know what it is and how they can protect themselves. In Liberia, 1 Ebola death has been confirmed and 6 more are suspected. Sierra Leone is investigating at least 2 deaths. The aid organisation Doctors Without Borders has called the outbreak unprecedented because previous cases have been limited to a small area. Mali's government reported on its Facebook page on Thursday that biological samples tied to 3 suspected Ebola cases within its borders are being sent to the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for analysis. In the meantime, the 3 people there suspected of having the disease are being treated in an isolated unit where their health is improving. Ebola is one of the world's deadliest viruses, causing a hemorrhagic fever that kills up to 90% of those infected. It spreads in the blood and shuts down the immune system, causing high fever, headache and muscle pain, often accompanied by bleeding. The virus is named after the Ebola River in the Democratic Republic of Congo, formerly Zaire, where one of the first outbreaks occurred in 1976. World at 8. This is the stage where all countries in Europe should monitor migrants and immigration from that part of the world. First to be deported should be the Africans who landed on Lampedusa, then follow through to the UK. We have Africans flying, crawling and paddling into this country from Europe every day. God knows what they are carrying in their bodies. Now is crackdown time, or live with the consequences of being helpful and sympathetic. In days of old they had leprosy colonies on islands for a reason, and this was before the EU and air travel. Russia raises gas prices for Ukraine by 80%. Reuters. Russia raised gas price for Ukraine on Thursday for the 2nd time this week, almost doubling it in 3 days and piling pressure on a neighbour on the brink of bankruptcy in the crisis over Crimea. The increase announced in Moscow by Russian natural gas producer Gazprom means Ukraine will pay 80% more for its gas than before the initial increase on Monday. Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk said that the latest move, after 2 weeks after Moscow annexed Ukraine's Crimea region, was unacceptable and warned that he expected Russia to increase pressure on Kiev by limiting supply to his country. There is no reason why Russia would raise the gas price for Ukraine. Other than one, politics, Yatsenyuk told Reuters in an interview in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. We expect Russia to go further in terms of pressure on the gas front, including limiting gas supplies to Ukraine. Moscow has frequently used energy as a political weapon in dealing with its neighbours, and European customers are concerned Russia might again cut off deliveries in the worst East-West crisis since the Cold War. That kind of action taken coercively against Ukraine is something we oppose, White House spokesman Jay Carney told reporters in Washington. We believe that markets should determine energy prices. The head of Russia's top natural gas producer Gazprom, Alexei Miller, told Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev the price increase was due to the introduction of an export duty on gas. The gas price is increasing automatically from April, Miller said. The latest rise will be to $485 per 1,000 cubic metres, 2 days after Gazprom announced a 44% increase in the gas price to $385.5 per 1,000 cubic metres from $268.5 due to unpaid bills. This is much more than the average price paid by consumers in the European Union. Ukraine covers 50% of its gas needs with Russian suppliers. It will soon get money from the International Monetary Fund under a new loan package, but faces large debts and its economy is in chaos. Valery Nestorov, an analyst from Sberbank CIB, said Ukraine could apply to an international court for a settlement. Gazprom has had to agree to cut gas prices and improve contractual terms for its European clients, including those who successfully challenged the Russian company in courts. The EU receives around half of its Russian gas supplies via Ukraine. It would be extremely difficult for Ukraine to pay such a price. I think this is just an instrument for further negotiations used by Gazprom, Nesterov said. Russia has moved to squeeze Ukraine's faltering economy after protesters toppled pro-Moscow President Viktor Yanukovych, installing new leaders bent on pursuing closer ties with the EU. Russia's annexation of Crimea last month deepened tensions, and Ukraine has vowed to take Russia to court over the seizure of Ukrainian assets there. In raising the price, Russia has scrapped two discounts simultaneously. One was introduced in 2010 when Ukraine agreed to extend terms for Russia's Black Sea Fleet in Crimea until 2042, and the second was agreed in December after Yanukovych scrapped a trade deal with the EU in favour of closer ties to Russia. As part of that deal, the Russian government agreed to scrap gas export duties for Ukraine-bound gas. Earlier this week, the Russian Federation Council, the upper house of the parliament, voted to annul the agreement on the Black Sea Fleet after Crimea was annexed by Russia. On Thursday, Gazprom also said Ukraine had to increase the level of gas in storage to ensure its stable transit to Europe. According to Ukraine's energy minister, the country holds 7.2 billion cubic metres in gas storage. It needs 12 to 14 billion cubic metres to ensure a stable flow of gas to Europe in the winter. World date. Perhaps the coal will kill off Ebola after it arrives here. Thought for the day. Who are the parasites? If you keep listening to the news, you would feel inclined to put on a face mask and lurch around gasping for breath in the light of the so-called deadly new smog outbreak which has hit the UK. Now, without going back in time to an era without the wheel, and that is a joke, I remember sitting at a reception desk in central London one winter in the early 1960s in a huge reception area of which the only entrance were 3 lifts directly up from the outside. And the smog or fog came up into my area every time a lift came up or down, and it was a pea super. Did we panic? Did the TV make a mountain out of a molehill? No, it was stiff British uppers in those days, and we soldiered on. I was not issued with a face mask or even warned about it. I just sat in a wreath of fog for 7 hours at a time for nearly a week, and my lungs, hopefully, survived. One look at the TV interviewees, who already had inhalers in hand and without exception were all, like myself or worse, well over the national average weight, and would probably have difficulty in breathing anyway, gasping their way for the TV. Now, I'm not decrying the fact that this smog is unwelcome and nasty, but we have to look at the reasons why smog has come our way again after so many years. Now, as for official global warming, I'm with Austin and to a great degree the British National Party on this one. Al Gore being the only man in the world, apart from other people cashing in, who has learnt to make a fortune out of what is in fact a worldwide human failure. We are the parasites. Now the term global is bandied about, and I truly believe that in eons past the world cooled and warmed up over vast periods of time and without the help of humankind to really bugger things up. So we have two camps. One camp say there is no need for any sort of action of the part of anyone because the world will just carry on expanding and contracting and the weather patterns will alter according to her moods. Another camp will recycle anything from methane to themselves in order to prevent any further shifting of the weather patterns. They will hug trees and dig their little hooves in over the slightest volcanic eruption or wind farm. Now, on a personal level, and I quote, personal level, I'm firmly in between the two. I acknowledge that global warming and weather changes have occurred during the millions of years that Mother Earth has been around, and I am an Earth person and do not believe our future is in the stars. My feet are firmly on terra firma. I love trees, animals and nature, and believe that although some global changes are inevitable, I believe that humans have brought their own forms of devastation with them through the centuries that they have been around. Even when ice ages occurred or volcanic eruptions, I don't believe smog was around in its present form. Smog is not natural fog, it is man-made and a product of an over-mechanised civilisation or civilisations. Take the UK. For the last 40 odd years every family has around 2 cars, average, if not more. The first thing immigrants buy apart from houses is a car when they arrive in the UK. Public transport has become difficult and catering for huge estates of people built out in the boonies is not possible, let alone a regular, reliable service which is, to be honest, not often used. We build over farmland with houses and offices, which means 90% of our food for our ever increasing population has to come in from abroad by lorries, diesel fuelled, which also run day and night constantly through the country. Planes also bring in vast amounts of usually totally unnecessary things like flowers grown in Africa and off-season fruits, all of which in the 50s we went without. For the last 40 years we have bred the me generations. They don't walk, they have too much crap food available, they're undereducated and don't even realise that the way of life they think they are entitled to is based on establishment propaganda, which reduces this country to being totally reliant on other countries and away from the fairly self-reliant prosperous country it was, and this has the effect of increasing our footprint in the world. We are becoming just a vast service station of movable human objects, all expendable. It might help us in the UK if we recycle more, but it won't help us to reduce petrol fumes and factory excreta, because to do that we would have to reduce the population, open up more areas to farming, allow trucks to deliver at night only, reduce cars, improve public transport and take the country and the British back in time about 50 years. In Asia, the vast number of factories that have been built to bad standards with no input from anyone on the green side that continue to belch out huge amounts of crap into the air are legion, China being the #1 offender. Tell the Chinese to reduce their emissions and what you get? A smile and total ignorance of what one is talking about. They will not reduce anything for anyone. Poor old Indonesia suffered for months from the smog that descended on that country, and although it was thought it was from the deforestation of the rainforests, there's a goodly proportion that came from further eastwards, namely China. Russia ain't too hot in that department and India is awful. Anything they build factory-wise is shoddy and cheap. The US doesn't shine either, and up to the 60s we didn't, with the coal fires and the coal-fired factories. We humans have stripped the rainforest, denuded vast areas of trees, and even in areas previously thought to be out of the way, they are stripping and building factories and rearing cattle for beef on land previously used for crops. And the well-off amongst all countries are cashing in on this strip mining of earth. So whilst we're all driving cars, eating vast amounts of food, using electricity and gas like it's going out of fashion, covering the earth with computers and commuters who use air miles like confetti, bringing in enormous amounts of luxury goods that we don't need but have been told that we do, we humans are the problem with Mother Earth. We are the parasites who take from their host and give nothing back. Global changes may be natural and necessary, but parasites who have been trained and given expectations way beyond their needs are not. I would not like to turn the clock back on medicine at all, and I'm not a Luddite, but I would take certain steps to ensure that the earth and us on it last a little bit longer than we really deserve to at present. The British National Party must give voice to the in-betweenies like myself, who remember when we could live without what are now considered not luxuries but the basics of a selfish and a self-centred civilization, destroying itself from within and the earth from without. And finally, hot and cold sex. After his exam the doctor asked the elderly man, "You appear to be in good health. Do you have any medical concerns you'd like to ask me about?" "In fact I do," said the old man. "After I have sex with my wife I'm usually cold and chilly, and then after I have sex with her a second time I'm usually hot and sweaty." Later, after examining his elderly wife, the doctor said, "Everything appears to be fine. Do you have any medical concerns you'd like to discuss with me?" She replied that she had no questions or concerns. The doctor then said to her, "Your husband has an unusual concern. He claims that he's usually cold and chilly after having sex with you the first time and then hot and sweaty after the second time. Do you know why?" "Oh, that crazy old fart," she replied. "That's because the first time is usually in January and the second time in August." You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend. More Birmingham head teachers raise fears of Islamic plot to take over schools. Norway, Breivik to go to court to end solitary confinement. Turkey's latest jihad on Armenian Christians in Syria. Nick Griffin MEP from the belly of the beast. Ebola toll tops 80 in West Africa. Russia raises gas prices for Ukraine by 80%. Thought for the day, who are the parasites? And finally, hot and cold sex. UK news. Grandson of Muslim Brotherhood founder, now an advisor to British government office. If British Prime Minister David Cameron is serious about investigating the Muslim Brotherhood in his country, he might want to start with one of his own government offices and a certain Baroness Vorsey, who serves as a senior minister there. Tariq Ramadan, the maternal grandson of Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, has not renounced the group. In fact, he proudly displays his ancestry and speaks frequently at Muslim Brotherhood events in the US. As Shubat.com has reported in the past, Ramadan is even connected to the Brotherhood's spiritual leader, Yusuf al-Qaradawi. Ramadan was named as the director of the Qatari-based Centre for
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 4th of April 2014. Grandson of Muslim Brotherhood founder, now an advisor to British government office. The Muslim Brotherhood, why is Cameron taking orders from bloodstained generals and playboy princes? Ways an underestimated Prime Minister, especially when dealing with domestic policy. However, he brought negligible experience of foreign affairs with him into Downing Street. As a result, he has largely been out of his depth and very easily swayed in foreign policy. The latest example of the Prime Minister's naivety concerns his decision to order an investigation into the Muslim Brotherhood and its alleged links to violent extremism in Britain. The timing of Mr Cameron's statement is strange and troubling. His announcement looks very much like a political stunt designed to protect Britain's trading relationship with Saudi Arabia. The announcement comes just 6 weeks after the British defence firm BAE's Islamic legislation, CILE, in 2012. It was learnt at the time that the CILE rolls up under the Qatar Faculty of Islamic Studies, QFIS, which is very closely linked to Qatari. World at 8, we are truly deluded into thinking these Muslims are on our side. They are not. None of them are ever on the side for a predominantly white Christian England. The Muslim Brotherhood, why is Cameron taking orders from bloodstained generals and playboy princes? Peter Osborne in his Telegraph blog writes, David Cameron has been a competent and in many